The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Tourism Master Planning, a Living Case Study. My name is Jim McCall, Director of Communications with DMAI. I'm happy to be welcomed by Paul Ouimet, Managing Director of Destination Next, and Kevin Hansad, Director of Market Research and Public Policy for Meet Minneapolis. We've got a great webinar planned for you today. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we jump in. We will be recording today's webinar, and a copy of the recording along with the presentation slides will be shared with everybody around 4 business days from now. So be sure to check your email and look out for that. We will also be accepting questions throughout the webinar today. So you can use the questions tab on your GoToWebinar panel. You can submit questions throughout the webinar, and I will be monitoring those questions and serving them up to Kevin and Paul at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm now going to pass it over to Paul Ouimet.
Well, thank you, Jim, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our 6th webinar this year. This one on another very hot topic in our industry. October 1 marked the first anniversary since we began doing assessments, and we now have over 290 destinations from 18 countries in our database. And what's been interesting is in the last year we've now completed 62 detailed assessments in 10 countries, and this includes Minneapolis, which completed an assessment as part of their current master planning initiative. We've been hearing from many of these destinations as one of the action items coming out of our workshops that there's a lot of consensus that tourism master plans can really help these destinations move forward. So we're hearing a lot of interest in this new emerging field. Last year, we included tourism master planning as one of the 30 recommended best practices in our handbook of Destination Next practices, and we used Indianapolis as a case study. That handbook of best practices is available on the DMAI website if anyone is interested. What we really like about master plans is that they can help a DMO improve both the strength of their destination as well as community support and engagement. And this is because of the very significant level of community engagement that we are typically seeing in master planning initiatives currently underway. So without further ado, I'm delighted to have with us today Kevin Hansad from Meet Minneapolis to share with us his project, which is currently underway. I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am bringing up my, there we go. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you our experience with the tourism master planning. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to speak to 2 topics. The first is what exactly is a tourism master plan, and the second is the state of our in-progress Minneapolis case study. We are rounding third base on the development of our tourism master plan, and more on that in a moment. But let's first talk about exactly what is tourism master planning. I recognize that across the audience there's a spectrum of knowledge of tourism master planning, and that some people listening already know a lot about the process. I would encourage you to maybe look at this section from the perspective of learning from some of the talking points that we have used that have been successful for us in helping to get buy-in to our plan from the city, elected officials, the business community, etc. So what is a tourism master plan? TMPs are relatively new, especially at the city level. They really started becoming popular post-Great Recession. We here at Minneapolis have been laying the groundwork for our tourism master plan for several years. We kicked it off at the very beginning of this year. Melvin Tennant had pioneered tourism master planning in San Antonio back in 2006. So we obviously used that as a guide. But at the time that we started developing our plan, Vancouver and Winnipeg of Canada had both already implemented 2 plans. And at that time, Indianapolis was just beginning to develop their plan. I was in the middle of their plan. And so at that time, I took the opportunity to talk to Paul Vallee of Vancouver, Chantal Nadeau of Winnipeg, and Matt Carter from Indianapolis. And they were all very, very helpful in answering my questions and helping us frame up our plan. So if I can do anything like that for anyone who is interested, just please let me know. So what is the definition of a tourism master plan? It's actually quite simple. It's a long-term strategic plan, 10 to 20 years, to develop the tourism industry in a city, a state, or a nation to drive economic benefit for the entire community. What is unique about tourism, and unlike other industries, is that we are actually comprised of multiple independent industries. And so you see some of them on your screen there. This particular point is an aha moment for many people outside of our industry. People at, in our case, the city level, our business leaders, they don't think about it like that. They didn't recognize that tourism is made up of all these independent and disparate industries. So in talking to them, what we talked about is that a tourism master plan unifies all these groups to work together all towards a single goal of enhancing a destination for the benefit of tourists. But the question then becomes, why should any destination be worried about tourists? Well, we in our industry all know that tourists reciprocate by spending money. And that money cascades into revenue for local businesses, wages for the local residents, tax revenue for the local government, and a reduction in the tax burden on the residents and businesses within that destination. Again, this is a strong talking point to get buy-in from key stakeholders. That isn't something they always think about, isn't necessarily top of mind for them. We all, as you all know, in the hospitality industry, do have a vested interest to work together, to collaborate, to ensure that our visitors in any destination are having a good experience. Because we know they already are, good, bad, and otherwise, and we want to try and ensure that it's the best possible experience. So another way to think about a tourism master plan is it's a forum or a vehicle to curate, if you will, the whole experience of a visitor from arrival to departure. However, of significant importance is the concern for the residents and the citizens of the destination. That one of the goals of a tourism master plan is also to conserve the natural and cultural resources, not just for the enjoyment of the tourists, but also for the residents. And not just for the residents of today, but the residents of the future. So I talk about this fact of the residents being the second foundational pillar equal to the tourists in the formation of a tourism master plan. This again is a strong talking point with the city in trying to describe the benefits of conducting and executing a tourism master plan. You see here some of the outcomes of tourism master planning, a strategic vision with a concrete action plan, an action plan owners with accountability, performance metrics, alignment across the tourism industry, this notion of organized advocacy for achieving a whole experience for visitors. And this next point again is a very important one, efficiency and cost effectiveness through public and private collaboration. Again, this is a strong talking point with the city and the business community, that a tourism master plan is not just a public funding or a public endeavor. It is about collaboration, a collaboration to reduce redundancy, waste, and I talk about this as being the third foundational pillar to a tourism master plan. Tourists being one, residents or citizens being two, and this public and private collaboration being the third. Excuse me. I'm looking at a continued list of some plan outcomes. Some of these are real straightforward to us in the tourism industry. I've talked about some of them already, but I want to speak to the last two: job creation, including gateway jobs, and the attraction of new residents. The tourism industry is a great entry industry for individuals with all varied levels of skill, including those with lesser skills or no skills. The industry provides the means to learn and develop skills, such things as processing credit card transactions, face-to-face customer service. It allows for people to develop with an industry, grow, assume greater responsibility, and hence earn greater levels of compensation. Also important is the attraction of new residents. Here in Minneapolis, our downtown has a plan, which we call the Downtown 2025 plan, and one of its goals is to increase the number of downtown residents to 70,000 by 2025. We're currently at about 40,000. What we suggest to the community is that bringing in more visitors increases the potential pool of new residents, that people most likely need to want to visit a city or a destination before they're going to seriously consider moving there. So we talk about it as a win-win for the tourism industry as well as our city in terms of attracting new residents and the talent that comes with those new residents. This is a typical structure of a tourism master plan. The DMO, represented in this case by Meet Minneapolis, the residents, the business community, and the appropriate level of government, in our case the City of Minneapolis, all spearheaded by a steering committee. Let's now switch gears and talk about our learning here in Minneapolis as we've moved through our plan development. This is the planning structure that we use. You can see it's very similar to that typical structure that I showed you a moment ago. We have a steering committee, we have 3 co-chairs, and then staff support provided by Meet Minneapolis and some of our colleagues in the city. Our 3 co-chairs are the mayor of our city, a lady by the name of Betsy Hodges, the chairman of our board of directors, Bob Lux, and then a gentleman, David Berg, who is the CEO of Carlson Companies, headquartered here in Minneapolis, and they own the Radisson and Country Inns and Suites hotel brands. You can see this display of subcommittees under our steering committee. Those were placeholders at the time we started this initiative because we told our audiences that we wanted to let the learning we gained through the early parts of the Tourism Master Plan to guide and determine what our subcommittees actually would be. So at the end of this presentation, I'll share with you how we actually netted out on our subcommittees. Our steering committee, we've got 30 individuals on the steering committee, and they are civic and business leaders from Minneapolis. Our timetable, we began all this work just in January. Our grounding work was all about just getting up and running, forming our steering committee, our task force, starting some data collection. The outreach was we were going out and communicating with visitors, our residents, other constituent groups such as the travel writers, and collecting all that data. And we are now in actually the heavy lifting section of the plan development. This fall, we are working with our subcommittees to actually develop the strategies that will form the basis or the plan itself. And I'll go into a little more detail of each of these phases in just a moment. But that gives you the lay of the land as we've been working through this year. So for the first quarter, January through March, we were working with forming our steering committee, recruiting civic and business leaders to be on our steering committee. Melvin, our CEO, did a lot of networking with his connections. We sent out formal invitations, defined the roles. This process took a little bit longer than I anticipated. It takes a while for people to respond and commit to such an endeavor. So one little piece of advice is to allow plenty of time for securing the members for your steering committee. As I said a moment ago, we have 30 members of business leaders and civic leaders. At the same time, we formed our task force, which is a small team which is actually managing this project. It's 7 members. So it's made up of myself, Melvin Tennant, our CEO, Jeff Johnson, the Executive Director of our Convention Center, and several of our colleagues here at Meet Minneapolis. But we had close alignment with our city City Hall, the staff there, the mayor's office, but also our city planning and economic development department were aligned with us in putting together this plan. We laid out a detailed project management plan. I translated that into a Gantt chart, which you see on the lower left-hand side of your screen. So those are all the activities. It goes on for several pages for us to accomplish to complete our plan. Those green columns at the top are 52 weeks of the year, and the colored in shades indicate when those activities are happening, and you can see the gradual flow out across the course of the year. I also did an initial market assessment of all the data we already had in hand about Minneapolis. We clearly weren't starting at ground zero, but I looked through it from the perspective of the Tourism Master Plan and wrote what I call this initial assessment of Minneapolis as a tourist destination, and that turned out to be a 145-page PowerPoint deck. So April through August, we were working with our steering committee. We've actually had 2 meetings with the steering committee. The first was back in April, where we had our kickoff meeting. We grounded all of them in a tourism master plan because not all of them were familiar with what that is. Shared with them the learning that we had to date at that point in time to lay the foundation for the plan. Talked about their role as a governing body for us, providing strategic direction to us, and the body to which we were accountable. Over the course of the summer, we conducted one-on-one interviews with the members of our steering committee, as well as other members of the civic and business leaders of our community. It was just a consultant and me that did that. And the goal was to cast a full 360-degree net to capture a good understanding of the tourism industry. And the basic questions for all these leaders were, what do they see as the tourism assets of Minneapolis? What are the gaps? And what are the opportunities? We then met again with our steering committee just in August to share all the research that we had gathered at that point in time, and then determined our subcommittees. As I said, we let the data guide the formation of our subcommittees, and I'll show you those in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about this grounding and outreach. This is all of our information gathering, what we did, how we did it, and what we learned. We, as I said, cast a wide net, wanted to get a full perspective of the industry of tourism in Minneapolis. So we talked to all these constituent groups, our staff here at the DMO, hospitality industry, key stakeholders, meeting planners, residents, travel writers, and of course, visitors. In the end, we talked to well over 3,000 people and 26 unique audiences through 6 data collection methods. We did focus groups, we did the one-on-one interviews I described a moment ago, traditional surveys, workshops, the DMI Destination Next online diagnostic tool, and street fairs. I want to speak just a moment about the Destination Next online diagnostic tool. Paul mentioned it. It is a very effective tool. It's easily accessible through a link. You can send it to any of your constituents that you want to help assess your destination as a tourism destination, and it provides good direction on what are the opportunities to improve your destination for tourists. Our goal was to synthesize and collate all this data to, in the end, tell one compelling story, because we had multiple streams of data. It wasn't like we got a big computer deck printout of all the data combined. We had to synthesize that and work through all that to tell our story. So what did we learn? I first want to share with you just a couple of research methodology learnings before I share some of the actual learnings about Minneapolis as a destination. One of the first learnings, especially for me personally, was the use of word clouds. I was very familiar with word clouds. Of course, they're used in the social media. I hadn't thought foolishly about using them in research. My colleagues suggested that we do, and it proved to be a wonderful tool. It made analysis easier, and it certainly makes communication easier. For anyone who might not be familiar with word clouds, in this example I'm showing you here, the larger the font size of a particular word, such as arts and culture, culinary scene versus sports, neighborhoods and lakes, means that more and more people mentioned that particular thought or word than did others. So hence it's displayed in a larger font size. So it helps you quickly identify and communicate what are people talking about, what's important to them in this example here. A second is the use of focus groups. I know a lot of you do focus groups. I've done many focus groups in my life in the past, but we have not done any here at Meet Minneapolis. And what I'm showing you here is this circle is the 400-mile drive radius of Minneapolis. And so for purposes of our tourism master plan, we did focus groups in Fargo, Des Moines, and Chicago, because they kind of form the perimeter of the 400-mile drive radius. And the beauty of the focus groups is we saw great consistency with what we were learning there. We could collate that with our survey data, but the focus groups were very helpful to help interpret some of the quantitative data coming out of the survey and put some more meaning around the more solid quantitative data. Finally, kind of a key research learning for us on methodology was the use of this whiteboard. In the end, our key method for collecting data from our residents was going to street fairs. We had a survey on our website. We tried to promote to residents and citizens to complete the survey. We did not get a good response there. But Minneapolis has 8 officially sponsored street fairs across the course of the summer. They're each in a different neighborhood. So we took out our tent and our whiteboard and engaged citizens as they bladed or biked or walked on by. And as you can see, the question there was simply, when you're showing visitors around town, where do you take your visitors? And some people immediately made a beeline over and started writing on the board. Some stopped, pondered, and then walked over to enter. And of course, some just walked on by. But it was a very effective way to collect data directly from our residents and citizens. So, what did we actually learn about Minneapolis as a destination? I'm definitely going to share some information with you to give you a sense of what we did learn. I'm not sharing everything. We don't have enough time. You would get bored. And indeed, some of it is confidential and proprietary at this point. But let me give you an example of some of our learning. Using that whiteboard I showed you, where do residents take their visitors here in Minneapolis? And what you can see here are to the various neighborhoods. Minnehaha Falls, it's a very large, significant waterfall right in the city proper of Minneapolis. Our tap room craft beer industry, our parks, the lakes, the museums, the theaters, Stone Arch Bridge is a 19th century charming bridge over the Mississippi River, Sculpture Garden, and Midtown Global Market, which is a market of communities of culture. What you may not know about the city of Minneapolis, and might be surprising to you, is that the city itself is quite ethnically diverse. This is the percentage splits of the communities of culture in the city of Minneapolis. And as you can see, Caucasian is only 6 out of 10 of our residents. So it was very important that we also communicate and connect with the cultural communities. And that did prove to be a challenge for us. So in the end, we did contract with a consultant, in this case the name of Creative Catalyst, a lady here in Minneapolis who has expertise in this area. We have a large Somali American community here, African American, Hispanic American, as you saw a moment ago. So she conducted the same types of workshops or focus groups or one-on-one interviews or surveys with those communities and produced the word cloud you see here. And you can see some of the same activities coming out on this word cloud: the arts, the museums, parks, festivals, lakes, etc. I'm going to show you a little bit more data, but first I want to give you some context. This is not new data to us. We track our visitation with DK Shiflett. And this is the number of visitors to Minneapolis-St. Paul, the metropolitan area, over the last 5 years. And you can see we had 32 million visitors in 2015. Las Vegas, as you probably know, had 42 million last year. That was an all-time record for them. 32 million was an all-time record for us. And our visitors spend a lot of money. These are charts, of course, I use with talking about our plan. $7.5 billion those 32 million people spent last year. Also through our Shiflett data, we know that a majority of our visitors, 3/4, 75% of our visitors, come from the 5-state area of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and the Dakotas. So with that some background, what I'd like to share with you now is a custom project that we did just for the purposes of our tourism master plan. This was a national survey of travelers around the country that we conducted in June and July of this summer. We talked to 3 different groups of travelers: recents, evers, and nevers. The recents were people who told us that indeed they had visited Minneapolis in the last 12 months. And now we are talking in particular the city of Minneapolis as opposed to the entire metropolitan area. The evers are people who say, oh yeah, I have visited Minneapolis in the past, but it was more than a year ago, more than the past 12 months. And then we talked to a group of travelers. These are people who do travel domestically. They don't stay at home, but they had never visited Minneapolis. So these are net promoter scores. The green bar is a net promoter score for the question, how likely are you to visit Minneapolis again? The blue bar for how likely are you to recommend Minneapolis as a destination to friends and relatives and colleagues. You can see the strong net promoter scores we get among our recent visitors. A perfect score would be 100. A perfect negative score would be 100. So we got 84 and 78 among our recent visitors. Those are the highest scores ever seen by our supplier, Strategic Insights and Solutions. Not surprisingly, among those evers, a much lower score, 34, but those are still not bad scores. Kind of a typical range of a good score is 20 to 40. And among the nevers, likewise not surprisingly, we got a minus score of 25 and 23. But to put that into context, you can have a score as low as minus 40. So that wasn't the worst score possible. But you see a clear different perspective of our city by these different visitor groups. So what accounts for that difference in perspective? Well, one reason is simply where they're coming from. In our survey, recent visitors, the green bar, 70% of those visitors live within the 5-state area. So that was great consistency with the Shiflet data I showed you a moment ago, which reports that 75% of our visitors come from the 5-state area. Whereas those ever visitors were much less likely to live in the 5-state area and to come from the rest of the United States. So one difference between the two is just their geographic proximity. We're a regional hub. We're the financial, cultural, pro sports, entertainment hub in the area. And so a lot of people come regularly for those purposes from the surrounding states. The second reason for difference in visitation by these recents versus evers is the reason for visiting. We gave the respondents these options. You recognize them all. Common reasons to visit friends or family, a weekend getaway, a business trip. And you can see both the recents and evers are primarily coming to visit friends and family. The recents also come very often for a weekend getaway, as I described a moment ago. But looking then among the evers, they're more likely to be coming for a business trip, much more than those recents. And this is where the beauty of our qualitative, and we saw the consistency between our qualitative data, our focus groups, and our survey data, our quantitative data. When we were talking to ever-type visitors in our focus groups, they were more likely to talk about their reasons for visiting as being somewhat of an obligation as opposed to a choice. For any of us, we can pretty much relate and say a business trip is for the most part an obligation. Certainly people add on to it to have fun, but your primary reason for visit is an obligation. But also even some of the evers talked about sometimes visiting friends or family can be an obligation. Hence, there is a different mindset about their reason for coming to visit Minneapolis. Talk a little bit about these never visitors. We're well aware that weather is an issue for us and the perception of weather, and the perception is not reality, but we understand that. But only 13% they said they never visited because of the weather. 6 out of 10 said in one way, shape, form, or another, you don't have anything for me to do. These were my words summarizing it all up, lack of interesting activity. But they don't recognize that we have attractions or activities that might entertain them. When we asked those same groups of never visitors, what words come to mind when you think of Minneapolis? This is the word cloud that was formed. Not surprisingly, cold, Minnesota, snow, Vikings, twins. But there's 2 insights to be taken away from this. The first is that these are very generic descriptors, which implies that they just do not know much about the city of Minneapolis. And the second is the Vikings and the twins. What it demonstrates is the power of professional sports to put a destination on the map. People around the country watch pro sports that are being held at any of the destinations around the country, and clearly the Vikings and Twins garner high recognition among sports fans. We talked to travel writers. What are the strengths of Minneapolis as a destination? Big, bold, and center, arts and culture. We do have a very rich cultural scene here. Many, many museums, world-class museums, a strong theater scene, many, many theater companies, large and small. Culinary scene, outdoor activities, variety of activities. We're friendly, we're accessible, we're sophisticated. All very nice things. However, when we ask them what are the challenges of Minneapolis, right front and center is our lack of awareness, our cold, the winter, our remoteness, and our identity. What was interesting about this notion of remoteness, in reading the report of the verbatims or the comments directly from the travel writers, what they talked about in this remoteness notion is that the mere fact that we share an international border with Canada just reinforces the fact that we are so far north, or appear, at least feel to be so far away. That sounds kind of pretty straightforward, but until I actually read that, I hadn't thought about it that way. And another example of how great consistency with our qualitative data, we were in Chicago doing focus groups, and in a similar type conversation with visitors, in this case, not travel writers, asking, how they see Minneapolis. One young man said, "I see you guys as Diet Canada." And I thought, whoa, okay, what is that? I asked him about that. And he said, well, you're like Canada, but you're not Canada. And I continued to pursue it with him. And it isn't a bad thing, but it's that we're like Canada, we're close to Canada, we're friendly, we're healthy, we're outdoors, and we're green. But that just continues to make our awareness issue more challenging, that, we're seen as Canada and not much different from Canada. So we recognize that we have a real challenge to develop a more strong identity for Minneapolis as a destination. So what do we do with all this data? What these blue boxes represent are the various themes that emerged that we could have potentially created as a platform and hence formed a subcommittee around. So you can see some of the topics I've just shown you in our data right there in the funnel: awareness, cultural diversity, outdoors and nature, arts and culture, beer, activities, neighborhoods, etc. But our task force looked through all that data, synthesized the data, and we identified 6 platforms that we felt formed a basis for subcommittees in which to develop our plan. And these are the 6 subcommittees that we formed. Minneapolis awareness, it's all about trying to build awareness for Minneapolis as a tourist destination. Tourism, diversity, and inclusion, and that's about certainly attracting people of color from around the country and the world to visit Minneapolis, but it's also how do we leverage and enhance the unique cultural offerings we have here that people don't know about, that emerge out of the strong communities of culture that we have in Minneapolis. Tourism infrastructure, as you all know, is kind of about bricks and mortar. Policy is more about guidelines, legislation, city ordinances. Activities is about things to do and events. And transportation and wayfinding about how to navigate through the city of Minneapolis. So how did we form our subcommittees? We recruited 2 co-chairs for each of those 6 subcommittees from our steering committee. We tried to align them, given the expertise they have, that would work well for the respective subcommittee that you just saw the list of a moment ago. Our goal was then to get 12 members on each subcommittee. We thought that was a large enough group, but not impossible to achieve. And we cast a wide net among civic and business leaders to attract people to be on our subcommittees. This is a challenge. We sent out a lot of invitations, did a lot of networking, and people are hesitant to commit. It is a time commitment. We did indeed end up with 12 on some committees, or closer to 10 on others. So we didn't fully get to the point we wanted. I'm feeling very comfortable where we are, but again, this is learning. It takes some time to form those subcommittees and to get people on board. We are using a series of 3 meetings for our subcommittees. We already had our first series of meetings just like last week, and that's a 2-hour meeting, and it's just grounding them in exactly what tourism master planning is and sharing with them the research, as I just did with you, of what we've learned, and then tailoring it to their particular subcommittee to help set them up so they have a good foundation of learning of tourism and the issue that they are to address, whether that's awareness or policy or infrastructure. We're on a bye week this week. Next week we will meet again, and that's where the heavy lifting will be done, where we will work with our subcommittees to develop strategies. We'll do that through facilitated exercises. We won't just, gather in a corner and put ideas up on the tear sheet and report out. We have worked very closely with a consultant who has worked closely with us through this process to develop unique activities to help and give people material and things to react to come up with good ideas. That'll be a 3-hour meeting. And then our third and final meeting will be another 3-hour meeting. That'll be the week just before Thanksgiving. And that will be about, revisiting those strategies, finalizing them, and identifying performance metrics to go with those strategies. Just some procedural learning here. I wanted to have 4-hour meetings for meetings number 2 and 3, and everybody pushed back and said, they just can't give that much time. So we went for 3-hour meetings for step number 2 and 3, and hence they'll be very focused with these facilitated exercises. This is actually our calendar of subcommittee meetings, color-coded by our 6 subcommittees. As I said a moment ago, we did our first 5 meetings just last week. They were very good. People showed up. They were engaged. They asked good questions. We asked them to challenge us, and indeed, in some cases they did. But it was good challenges. Challenges came towards what was the charter of the respective subcommittee. We had drafted a starting point of a charter for the subcommittee, got their reaction. We wanted to frame that up with their help. We wanted to get their buy-in and their engagement, and that's where we spent some good conversation on fine-tuning what that charter is. Next week, we'll do the ideating, and then in the week of November 14, we will do our finalization and identify performance metrics. So what's next following this subcommittee work? Our goal will be to wrap all that up by Thanksgiving. Then we'll need to vet the strategies. Some might be more complicated than others. Some things might already be being done in that area. We don't want to do anything redundant or wasteful. So we'll have to do some exploration of the proposed strategies, prioritize them, and then we'll actually write the plan. We have already employed a professional writer, a former writer for the local newspaper, Minneapolis Star-Tribune. He's also an author. He's written several books, has a great passion for the city. He's already started writing the plan, the background, etc. Then we'll start incorporating these strategies. And then we will launch our plan formally at our annual meeting on March 2nd. We introduced the Tourism Master Plan at our annual meeting just this past March. I did the keynote describing what a Tourism Master Plan was, what our vision was, inviting everybody to participate. We even did a table exercise at that meeting, asking them for ideas about the industry, created a word cloud from that. But our goal has been to, every step of the way that we can, to get engagement, get feedback, get buy-in from all of our participants. So we'll have come full circle by March of this year, and then we'll be implementing the plan beginning in calendar year 2017. So that's the end of my slides. I think at this point I will turn it back to Paul or Jim.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We are now going to open it up to questions. So once again, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them using the questions panel of the GoToMeeting. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and get us started. What region specifically was the master plan done for? Was it for the city of Minneapolis, or was it the metropolitan area? And were your neighbors like Bloomington and St. Paul involved at all? And if so, how were they involved?
Good question. Thanks for clarifying that. I should have said that up front. Our plan is for the city of Minneapolis, the full geographic city, not just the downtown, but it is not for the metropolitan area. In a perfect world, we would be doing it at the metropolitan area. Based on previous work that had been done at the state level and the city level, it was challenging to get all of the entities engaged. There is collaboration across all these entities. I don't want to suggest otherwise, but to get engagement on this particular initiative was challenging. And just briefly, one of the reasons why is Minnesota has a unique state law that a municipality can collect a lodging tax if some of those funds are used to market the respective municipality. So in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, we have over 20 DMOs. We're just one of 20 DMOs. That made it challenging to try and do something at the metropolitan level.
Can you talk about what your budget was for this master planning process?
Indeed, I can. We have done it on a pretty small budget. Our total budget was $175,000. Our agreement with the city is that they would fund that much in this year's budget and that we would match that. So we do have our own private fundraising efforts going on. One of the advantages we had to do it less expensively than some destinations might is that I have a fair amount of experience in all this area of research, and so I was able to do a lot of that work myself, so that helped us keep costs on the lower side.
And can you talk about how you identified any outside resources or consultants to be part of this process? Were you looking for tourism-specific knowledge, or were you more looking at the process and then you could bring in the tourism knowledge for them?
We did work with a couple consultants in a couple of different ways. One was on the interviews with the civic and business leaders. We contracted with an organization here in Minneapolis called CSNL, Convention, Sports, and Leisure. They have expertise in this area. They'd worked with Melvin on the San Antonio plan. We've included them along in this process. We respect and appreciate their contributions. But we definitely did commission them to conduct these one-on-one interviews this summer with the civic and business leaders that I talked about. Then that custom survey, national survey that I shared a little bit of data from, we did hire a research supplier to conduct that national survey, and that is SIS, Strategic Insights and Solutions, is someone I've worked with for many years, and they do have tourism experience. And then I also talked about Creative Catalyst, the consultant that helped us with the communities of culture here in Minneapolis. Those are the three primary suppliers we worked with on the data collection.
And as far as getting government buy-in, was there any pushback at all, or were there any challenges in getting the civic leaders to buy into this process?
It went pretty smoothly, I have to say, but they asked fair questions and challenging questions. So the most part of that was up front, way back in 2015, when we were laying some of the initial groundwork with the city, and some of their questions were, why now? How does this relate to some of the other plans that are being developed at the city level? The city of Minneapolis is a very efficient and productive city government. I referred to CPED, the city planning department. They do a lot of planning. And so the questions were, well, why and how does our plan connect with those plans? I referred to our downtown council plan. So the primary questions were, why now, and how does this align with the other planning efforts that already are going on in Minneapolis?
And similar to that, we all know that a lot of times strategic plans or business plans end up collecting a lot of dust on a shelf. How do you make sure that this plan is actually used, and what are the next steps to activate this plan?
Good question. A couple things. One real basic one is, as I said, we've contracted an author to write our plan. It'll be a published document. He actually wrote the plan for the document, the narrative for this Downtown 2025 plan we're talking about. So it's a very high quality magazine-like publication. So that in itself just gives some tangibility to the plan, that it is real, and that we can communicate all the work that's gone into it. Secondly, we're already working on our implementation committee. We're still just forming the strategies for the plan now, but looking ahead, we're working on identifying our implementation committee. And what we're currently thinking is incorporating that into our actual board of directors so that there's total engagement, that they're already a part of our organization, and helping us to implement from within our own board. But we're also learning from the experience of our group, this Downtown Council I keep referring to, is they have been very successful in having 10 very tangible strategic goals, and they have subcommittees that continue to work and meet regularly on moving those goals forward. And so we're looking at using a model very similar to what they've done. And so in the same way we formed subcommittees here for the actual plan development, we'll form subcommittees for the implementation as well. And that will be comprised of similar civic and business leaders, so that there is buy-in and commitment and some skin in the game. And that implementation will start rolling out after our annual meeting in March.
And what about your own internal staff at Meet Minneapolis and maybe some of your business partners? Did you have to educate them on what a tourism master plan was and what the process is going to be like?
We did. I had to learn myself. I wasn't fully familiar with the tourism master plan. I was a part of Melvin's vision, and we started, looking into it. So yeah, I was starting, and I'm the project leader on it. So I was educating myself. I was then educating our organization because they have a lot of expertise here. We want their buy-in and commitment, and kind of envision it like concentric circles. We had to keep rolling it out, to the city, to our board of directors, to other civic and business leaders, because not many people had a good understanding of what a tourism master plan is, and in part because they're relatively new, as I started my comments. But the minute you start talking about it, as one of the analogies I would use, I'd say, it's just like a strategic plan you've done for your organization. It's a long-term plan, but what makes it unique is it's for a geography as opposed to a single entity, an organization. And it's made up of all these unique industries. It's not just one industry or one organization. So, people quickly and easily come to understand what it is.
And I have a couple of questions on the process that I'm actually going to ask Paul to answer. And the first one is, how does Destination Next correlate with the tourism master planning process? And which should be undertaken first? Is it the Destination Next feeds in the master plan, or do you do a master plan and then start talking about Destination Next?
I think Destination Next, the assessment can provide a tremendous amount of insight into the core questions that a tourism master plan have to address. One of the major elements of a DNext assessment is destination strength, and the 10 variables that are evaluated there will provide insight in terms of the areas of weakness or strength for any given destination. We have done DNext assessments as a precursor to a master plan, and we've done it also in other situations where it's been used, as in the case in Minneapolis, as an input into a formal tourism master planning initiative. So I think it can be done both ways. In other communities, what we've seen is a lot of cities have actually used the DNext assessment as a way of getting buy-in from the industry and community leaders to actually undertake a tourism master plan.
And that's something that's been brought up a lot, is getting that buy-in and ways to get the stakeholders on board with this strategy. Can you talk about basically your experience in working with destinations around the world and the process of educating them and getting that buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been one of the most shocking takeaways that I've had in doing these assessments in the U.S. and abroad, is just how little so many of our community leaders and general business community really think about tourism and the significant opportunities that our industry represents. So I think putting a community through an assessment and doing a presentation on the results, talking about the growth and the great opportunities that we have in tourism, both for meetings, conventions, and leisure, and then to talk about how competitive the environment is, is something that is a really powerful message that needs to be communicated to many, many communities.
And we've seen how Kevin and the team at Minneapolis have done this with a major city. Do you feel that this strategy is effective for DMOs of all sizes? Is this something that a smaller destination, maybe a rural destination, should be thinking about doing themselves?
I do. I have a passion for this plan. I have a passion for the city of Minneapolis. I have a passion for the process. I feel that we're doing the right thing. We're moving in the right direction. And when I even started this plan, when I talked to Chantal up in Winnipeg, she had talked about how, actually hearing about first tourism master planning at one of your conventions back in 2010, prompted her to go home and work on the plan there, and that really they managed it and implemented it just from within the DMO. So I was inspired by that. I think any organization, any entity, any destination can do one and should do one. I think it has great value. I think it helps communicate to the larger business community and civic community what tourism is, and helps to get their buy-in, and I think on a longer level or a longer perspective than just the purposes of the plan. So I think there's several levels of benefits from doing a plan, and you can tailor the plan to your destination and your market. When I talked to other people who had done plans before us, they had spent more money, they had done more consulting work. We adapted that model to what we could do here, and I already described that, how we did it on somewhat lesser money. So I think with a basic framework, any destination can embrace a tourism master plan.
And Paul, to that end, have you seen any state tourism boards or regional tourism boards or even national tourism boards implement this master planning process? And if so, how does that align then with the city level DMOs in that region who are doing their own?
Yeah, I think it is something that at a regional or at a national level there have been some initiatives similar to this. In Mexico, they have implemented through Fonatur a regional master planning approach, identifying different core tourism zones and trying to build each of those strategically. We have seen in other municipal regions where, unlike what we see in Minneapolis, where at a county level or a larger metropolitan region where a number of different communities have worked together to put together a plan as well.
And I think we have time for one last question, and it's a very important one. I'm going to ask it to both of you, and I'm going to ask Kevin to answer first. Anytime we do any sort of activity, there's obviously has to be some sort of metrics for success to see how we're doing. So what are the metrics that you are going to be using to evaluate the success of your master plan?
Great question, and I agree with that. We've built that fact into our project from the very beginning. You might recall when I showed you before we even talked about our work, what the anticipated outcomes are, and that it's performance metrics. And what I also talked about is that within our subcommittees, after we develop and identify the strategies, the subcommittees in that last of those 3 meetings will be tasked with identifying at least some performance metrics to create a starting point of, okay, given our particular strategy, now how are we going to measure it? I don't think we're going to be able to fine-tune those equally across strategies or by committee. It'll be incumbent upon us and the staff to do that, but they are critical and we will use them, but they're yet to be started in our subcommittee work. So I don't have the exact answer to what they will.
Yep, and Paul, do you want to talk about some general success metrics you've seen used in these master plans?
I think over the longer term, there's really 3 critical metrics that I believe are really important. The first one is the total number of overnight visitors that you see in a destination. The second one is the average length of stay of those visitors. And the third one is the daily spend rate of those visitors. And I think all 3 of those are very, very strong indicators of how the destination is doing, and you know, as a destination tries to build its attractions, build its services and facilities, that'll give you a pretty good handle on how you're doing.
Well, thank you both. That's all the time we have for questions for today. If you did ask any questions that weren't answered, we have those and we'll try to get back to you. You also have our contact information on the screen if you want to send either of us an email with follow-up questions. I just want to thank Kevin again for volunteering his time today. It's been a very valuable webinar, I would think, for most of the attendees. And I just want to turn over to Paul real quick to talk about what we're going to have coming up next on the Destination Next webinar schedule.
Yeah, thanks again, Kevin, for your great presentation today, and to all of you for attending. Stay tuned for the notice. Our next webinar is going to be next Friday, November 4th, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, on another really hot topic, air service development. So Jim will be sending out a notice shortly with login instructions for that seminar in the next couple of days. So thanks everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a good day.